All right, I suppose we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the California Fire Science Seminar Series. My name is Ajinkya Desai, and I will be your host for today. I am currently a PhD candidate at UC Irvine working on wildland fire atmosphere interactions in Professor Tirtha Banerjee's Boundary Layers and Turbulence group. I am also a member of the student committee who assisted in organizing the California Fire Science Seminar Series. The California Fire Science Seminar Series is organized and supported by the California Fire Science Consortium, the Fire Research Group, the University of California at Berkeley, and the University of California at Merced. The student committee was also integral to the success of this seminar series, which included 18 students and postdocs from across the nation who helped select speakers and topics for the series. Also, just to give you a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the California Fire Science Consortium website and the YouTube channel. So that's something to be mindful of. Following the talk today, there will be a Q&A session. So feel free to add any questions you have to the Q&A chat, but you can do that throughout the presentation or throughout the session. Today's seminar, Changing the Fire Paradigm in the Klamath Mountains, will be given by Bill Tripp. Bill is the Director of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy for the Karuk Tribe, the Department of Natural Resources. Large fires have been a regular occurrence for decades in the western Klamath Mountains of Northern California, and Bill has 27 years of place-based experience on living with wildland fire. Bill has been conducting cultural burns on Karuk ancestral territory since a very young age and has also been training the next generation of fire practitioners while supporting key research on cultural fire. So we are very grateful to have Bill here today, and please join me in welcoming Bill.
Thank you. Um, yeah, thanks for giving me the time here to speak to this audience. We've been doing a lot of work in this space in those areas discussed, as well as informing the policy arena as well, which has kind of proven to be a vital component of the work. You know, the there is an example of some paradigm shifting activities I would like to kind of highlight in the beginning of this talk. And that is the example that was provided by the 2023 SRF lightning complex that occurred on Six Rivers National Forest, and which ultimately culminated in managing wildfire specifically for an objective related to avoiding deference of risk to the future, um, and being able to put 50,000 acres of fire on the ground during this wildland fire event, where we had favorable atmospheric conditions. Of course, and that's the only year I've seen like that in the past 30 years. But there is a chance we may see more years like that in the future, with some of these summer storms just being a lot more intensified um, that we're seeing recently. Some of these thunderstorms that are popping up midsummer are dumping inches of rain in a matter of hours, and that can significantly alter fire behavior for a very long duration of time. This particular event was very widespread, um, which was part of its unique nature. Um, I'll turn off my email so that doesn't happen anymore. So there's a video that we made, and I think we'll probably share a link to it in the chat for folks if you haven't seen it. Called "Shifting the Paradigm in Cook Aboriginal Territory." We had kind of produced this video to help tell the story of what we were doing that year, and to provide as an example of what we really needed to start trying to do. It started out with the Forest Service actually producing a video, so the Forest Service has a version of this storyline on the internet too. But we felt it didn't tell as complete of a story that was really needed. Um, and it really didn't include a lot of the tribal specific perspectives. So they shared a lot of the footage and with us they had in their video and in the interviews that they took with their Forest Service staff, and we were able to compile it in with a little bit more inclusion of our tribal folks that were engaged in the incident. And so the it was kind of a situation where we had a large wildfire, like we're getting almost every year in our territory, and we've had a memorandum of understanding in place since 1994 that creates the framework for our folks to engage in the management of the incident, primarily to protect cultural resources. Now, it's taken decades to get to the point to get the agencies to understand that cultural resources are not just artifacts. It's we have a living culture, and there's a landscape memory out here that sure these artifacts can be an indication of the types of things that were used and processed, but it's ultimately that landscape memory that holds that knowledge of those connections, and so that's the information that we use when we're out there. And so if we're finding indications of you know old growth tan oak, and a bunch of first dumps, then it's an indication that this once was and probably should be steered back to a certain type of a stand type or condition on the landscape. If we're seeing a bunch of dead black oak and a whole bunch of young fir trees, then that's an indication of a different setting, one that's more open and more deciduous, tree kind of dominated, that the shade intolerant species are disappearing from our landscape quickly. And so having regular frequent fire regimes reestablished on this landscape is critical to the restoration and maintenance of these types of spaces. Um, so we've have been trying since um, since 1994 to kind of change the dialogue, and we ended up getting some significant policy shifts in 2009 with the passage of the Flame Act, and we got I think there was a 2005 wildland fire management policy change that enabled some things. I believe in 2000, and the Flame Act called for the establishment of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. Um, over the years, I think it wasn't until 2014 that that wildland fire management strategy actually ended up being published. after going through, three distinct phases of, report generation leading up to that framework being solidified in the national policy arena. Moving on to different things like the passage of AB 642, which defined cultural burning in state law. The recent passage this past year of SB 310, which creates an agreement in lieu of permit structure. Um, to be able to get cultural burning engaged more across the landscape, while also providing cultural fire practitioners with access to the Prescribed Fire and Cultural Burning Claims Fund that is established in California. All of these things are just pieces of the puzzle that have to ultimately end up coming together to make a meaningful difference on the ground. Um, and so, this particular incident was one of those that did make a meaningful difference on the ground and in getting that 50,000 acres burned. And in the name of avoiding deference of risk. Um, when you remove fire from this landscape for a long duration, it's just all of the fuels and accumulate, and mesification occurs and conifer encroachment like happens, and conditions end up getting to the point for a while to where things simply don't want to burn very easily until it gets to that point where things are starting to go into stem exclusion, and the duff layers are just built up so much that, and large wood and just brush and everything else moves in so thick that when it does burn, it burns incredibly hot. um, in 2020 we saw the Slater fire that came through Happy Camp. um, and so that burned at such high intensities. I mean, it was a like near complete stand replacing fire for that burned, over 100,000 acres in the first burn period. So, 12 hours. And we saw um, a fire event that dwarfed large fire occurrence as we knew it just 10 years prior. Um, and so the significance of the problem is extraordinary. And really the only way to resolve it um, is to restore our relationships with that landscape and restore our relationships with the ecosystem process and function that maintains those relationships. And these relationships are founded in our indigenous knowledge, practice, and belief systems. We've been trying to go through the consultation processes with agencies for decades just to be like, well, that technically would be prescribed fire. If it's prescribed fire, it's a project. If it's a project, you need NEPA. To get NEPA, you need to have be on our program of work. To be in our program of work, it has to be prioritized amongst all these other factors, and some of these factors that our line officers are graded on in their annual reviews is the production of timber. Not even the thinning of timber, but the number of board feet that's advertised for a bid solicitation. It doesn't even have to sell to get credit. And so the whole system is based on an economic principle in service to industry, and as opposed to a foundational relationship of humans being connected to their natural environment. And so we like to frame that as changing from a socioeconomic resilience first approach to one of a socio-ecological resilience first approach to um, to managing the landscape. Um, we've produced a lot of papers and just information on that subject around integrating our indigenous knowledge, practice, and Black belief systems into these academic frameworks to communicate information to folks like federal decision makers and policymakers and whatnot. But we also, along the same lines, need to, are focusing on our youth to be able to communicate to our own people in our own ways through our traditional stories and through actually, getting out and doing. Um, and so you know, it's a process that traditionally started at a very, very young age. When you look at the dominant management system that's in place today, it's predominantly driven on economics, and there's all of these qualification systems, all of these best management practices, you know, planning processes, decision-making processes that um, require all of these things that ultimately separate you from the natural world for most good part of your life. You have to be 18 years old before you can even take a a wildland fire management training to be able to actually go and experience being on a fire line. Well, in our indigenous knowledge, practice, and belief systems, our children are exposed to that stuff very young. They're tied into baskets leaning against a tree while their mom and their grandma and all their brothers and sisters and cousins are, out there burning. And so they're seeing these things, they're smelling these things, they're feeling the way the wind blows across their skin when these things are going on. And these things all end up being part of that, lifelong education system that in ways not can in a lot of ways become instinctual. And so like a good example is when I go out to burn in February, um, when it's a kind of a dormant season, late winter burn. um, I don't put a fuel stick out and I don't, and measure you know the um, the fuel moisture and measure the relative humidity and measure the wind speed and direction and all of these things. I'm burning in a place that I know, and I'm burning in a place that I grew up in, and that it's I'm looking at the manzanita bush and is oh look, it's starting to bud. It's probably going to dry out soon. Sure enough, here comes some flower blooms. Um, Here comes the sun and the flower blooms, and then you see the bumblebee out there. And when you see the bumblebee out there, the pine needles are going to burn, the whitethorn's going to burn, the oak leaves are going to burn. And they're going to burn when that bumblebee's not underneath of that duff. Um, and so and so those are the things that I look to, and I don't even start looking for the manzanita until you start feeling that change. You can start feeling the breeze on the hairs on your wrist a little different, and you can start feeling the temperature and the humidity in the inside of your nostril when you're just outside doing other things, and it's just an automatic reminder. It's like, oh, hey, are those manzanitas blooming yet? I should go check that out. Um, and so it's a different system of decision making. And so and so it's a hard it's a hard one to get folks to understand and hard one to get folks to feel comfortable with, especially with so much reinforcement and education around, Smokey Bear and only you can prevent wildfires, and you stamp all fires out by 10 a.m. the following day, and all of these things that we have a significant risk of coming back to being the predominant viewpoints in our society, after decades of work trying to finally get people to understand that these are flawed and these are actually the cause of the devastation that's occurring in this space. Um, so it's there's a whole lot to talk about in that realm. Um, so and I know that we're going to be getting into some questions later. But do you think there might be a chance to kind of just watch this video and get a feel for that before questions start? Or should I just keep going in this speech format?
Sure. That sounds good. Would you like to share the your screen with the video on it, or should I do that?
Can you do that on your end?
Yeah, I think I can try doing that. Yeah. Thanks.
That's not the right one. Oh wait. Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, that's the right one. Just wasn't at the beginning.
Can you hear the audio?
No, I can't. Maybe I'll just keep talking. We live in a park.
Okay.
So, yeah, folks can just watch it on their own. We should have thought like tested it beforehand. Um, so, more recently we've been talking about creating, we have been kind of successful in working with the state of California to establish some of these laws around cultural burning and the prescribed fire cultural burning claims fund. And we've been getting some success with like the Forest Service and being able to manage this incident in 2023 the way we did. Um, there was a lot of pushback within the agency itself in being able to get there. A lot of people in the fire management system really pushed back and were like, "This is not what we do. We put fires out. We protect forests. We protect homes. We protect people's lives." And they don't. They just like as a foundational element of their being, they do not believe that this is a solution, and it is part of what they need to do to make this all safe and right again. Um, Now, people in other areas, were supportive. And you look at the Northeast, you look to the Southeast, they were able to hold on to their, the human use of fire a little bit more culturally, in context. If you ever get a chance to dig into the storyline, there's a book out there called Our Pappies Burn the Woods. And basically, it was a situation where, the Weeks Act was passed, and the states gained a little bit more foothold in the way fires were going to be managed. The Weeks Act was predominantly around the sale of the purchase of lands in the east for developing forest reserves and but in order for the Western governors to sign on, there was some political horse trading that happened, and part of that horse trading was that there had to be an authority incorporated into the process that enabled states and feds to coordinate on on how they were going to carry out wildland fire management programs. And so, before that, it was basically the foundational premise that it was the federal trust responsibility or part of the obligation of the federal government to protect tribes from states. And until when that happened, when in the realm of fire, it caused the state um, the state's the premise of the state's foundational belief system to kind of take control of the dialogue. And by 1911 was the last time we were able to do our ceremonial burning practices on Off-Field Mountain. And so we've been working for the past 30 years to start working back towards that. So we can do that again as part of our ceremonies that are our that serve as our reminder of who we are and what our responsibility is. And so we still have the information on what we're supposed to do, but if that's not going to last long if we can't get people out there to do it and to pass it on. um, Stories are great. Information flow in discussion is great. But until you put it into practice, it's really hard to truly understand the nuance. And and so we've been able to implement a series of projects up here on Six Rivers National Forest, which really helped build the relationships that enabled this 2023 SRF Lightning Fire Complex to be managed the way it was. And so, right around the time the cohesive strategy was published back in 2014, we had also been working on establishing a large landscape collaborative called the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership. Now, that was co-led by the tribe and some local NGOs in the area, mainly the Mid Klamath Watershed Council and the Salmon River Restoration Council, and the Crook Tribes Department of Natural Resources, and so we were able to you know to through our government to government consultation processes, um, we had built some relationships to overcome some serious obstacles that we had with the way projects were even being managed that were kind of anti-tribal. When we're promised that projects wouldn't start in the most highly sensitive, culturally sensitive locations, they would, and then the damage would be done before anyone knew the project started, and then what you told them needed to be protected was damaged. And that kind of entered us into an era for about the past 10 years where we were able to really work to understand each other's viewpoints and understand where each other were coming from and identify a set of shared values that we want to work towards and help to meet each other's um, value sets in doing the right thing on the land. Now that ultimately led into a process of having a full integration of the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership into the Six Rivers program of work that I mentioned before. And so and the setting of priorities. Um, and so our Khariatuiship program project was, that number one priority. We had already done a demonstration called the Bar Integrated Wildland Fire Management Project, um, where we were actually able to take our indigenous um, traditional ecological knowledge and use that as the foundation for why we select a set of focal species. Um, publish a cultural resources specialist report around why we want to focus on those species and formulate the entire project around restoring conditions conducive of ultimately being able to um, get to doing the Nesh project on Ophel Mountain, or Echet Tuiship, which means the spirit people's place. And so and so the and so our first priority once we got into the priority setting for the program of work was that we were going to do the Haretuisha program project, and then we were going to do the Black Mountain project, which was also burned as part of the World Renewal ceremonies. But it was burned, not, it wasn't burned in at the new moon in September, like Offhill Mountain, but it was burned in the full moon in August. And so, at the time, we were like, oh, burning in August, that's going to be a pretty hard sell. People are pretty afraid of fire, right? And so, well, maybe we can get to the new moon in September. You're actively noticing nighttime humidity recoveries. A lot of primarily the northeast type of wind events are starting to shift to our south for the most part. Um, and at least the intensive and the direct hit by those wind events is typically on the backslide by then. And so the we went down that as with Black Mountain being kind of a second priority, then with around the town of Orleans being the third, and and on and on down to for the first five, which ended up you know covering a good portion of the overlap area from of Six Rivers National Forest and Cutter Aboriginal Territory. Um, and so I mean that was years ago, and we've done a couple of things. We've got those planning processes take forever. We had really good momentum. We got the SOMS project NEPA done. We've got contracts out. We're doing work. We're getting it done. A wildfire happens on the Klamath. There's one person that can be a contractor to do the thinning. Um, there's only four or five, you know, um, companies bidding on the fuels reduction piece. So the limit on how much we could do in a given year ended up shrinking. Um, and then things like the Slater fire happened. Things like the you know can't remember the name of the fire, but the Mad River Ranger District pretty much burned up in its entirety. And so those kind of things ended up shifting agency priorities, right? And so the agency priorities moved away from the partnership priorities. And so now those functional roles that the agency had to do, like signing NEPA and writing specialist reports, halted progress. We were out collecting data, we're doing all the field work, we're doing all of the work behind getting it done, but we just didn't have the people available to pull that information together. Just so happens that particular piece is considered an inherently federal function. So unless you're a federal employee, you can't do it, right? And so, you know, so um, so we're just now getting back to the point where we have people pulled together to do that work, and now we're seeing funding freezes, and we're seeing um, deprioritization of we're seeing positions get just fired because of when they were brought on as permanents, regardless of what their functional role is, and I have a hard time seeing how that helps to gain efficiencies. But well, hopefully we'll be able to figure something out soon. Um, the I can't remember what year it was, but we've been able to do some proactive burning in some places that are just completely inaccessible, and we've been able to find ways to reinterpret the way we look at limited operating periods with things like the northern spotted owl and the Humboldt martin and their different species like that. Um, so we're able to build, connect those information sources together to be like, hey, these practices at these times of year complement the life cycle. They enhance the habitat. They do all of these things that people care about in this world, and and um, and we're right on the edge of being able to organize resources to get to really like scale that out. Each one of our projects, we started the Somes Bar Integrated Wildland Fire Management Project at I think 5,500 acres, and we considered that small. That was a small demonstration. Um, the next priority was 13,500 acres, and then the next project after that started to double and triple, and getting up to where ideally we are able to look at much larger landscapes. um, that process was kind of slow going, and so one of the things that we did to at least get enhance our ability to get out there and deal with the small diameter wood loading that poses major threats to the way fire behaves, as well as the long duration between fire events, where the fuel building builds up. We were able to get a couple of the projects like the Leary project and the Six Rivers Fire and Fuels project on the books with signed NEPA documents, so we can actually go do some small diameter thinning, cutting, pile burning, and get some prescribed fire on the ground a lot faster. And so those are in place now, and we did manage to pull off 135-acre prescribed fire on the backside of Off-Field Mountain. Um, here a couple of Junes ago. If that would have burned in the fall, um, there wouldn't have been any moisture underneath all of that deep duff. There wouldn't have been moisture in the large wood. That probably would have burned a majority of the overstory canopy. Um, but being able to burn that at that time where we had at least some moderated conditions it isn't the favorable time to do in the traditional framework or the traditional time of year with the tan oak stands. We should be burning in the fall. But in order to save that tan oak overstory, we had to burn it in June. Um, and we found a way to do that. We found a way to get the spotted owl limited operating periods lifted in time to be able to get that first burn entry in the time that would make the most meaningful difference. And so there are ways to do these things and get these done. And the community taking the lead is really what ends up getting us there. And it's what's going to get other people to get there as well. If the community can't organize and tribes and NGOs and just peoples of place can't come together to get through these things, then it's just constantly going to end up being a back and forth. Um, there's enough of that already. So, I guess I'll just close out for the question and answer here by saying that, this last year, we started burning on September 25th. So, the prescribed fire activities, for our fall burning. We got a lot of burning done in June, a lot of burning done in February, March. Um, we don't burn April, May, beginning of June. We stopped burning the third week of March when our traditional indicators presented themselves. Um, and then we started June burning September 25th, and we missed 6 burn days. Um, by the end of December. And so um, that's a lot of burning. We had the Nature Conservancy, the Forest Service, contractors, the Yurok tribe, Karuk tribe, all coming together whenever anyone had anyone available to get out there and get this work done collectively. And it's just a an awesome success. And that success is kind of teetering on the balance on whether or not some keywords are gonna get contracts canceled, but that remains to be seen. I believe there are shared values there, and it should be okay. But I guess with that, we can open up for questions.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Bill, for that really engaging talk. Yes, we would like to open it up for questions for now. Due to time constraints, we request that all questions be asked in the chat box, and I can read them one after the other. There are a few questions, and we can get started with those. I think to a certain extent you addressed this, Bill, but there's a question in the chat box that asks, will the turbulence inflicted on the Forest Service by the new administration in DC affect the Karuk Nation's work in this space?
Yeah, that's a question I'm having as well. There were orders to stop spending. Um, Then there were, in certain areas, I didn't see active management or federal tribal partnerships or anything like that specifically mentioned. Um, the I think there's some confusion around people thinking that tribal federal relationships are a DEI thing. They're really not. Tribes are distinct political communities in the Constitution of the United States. And so it's not a DEI thing. It's a foundational United States, like, I mean, it's undermining that undermines the sovereignty of nations and states and everyone else in the world. So I don't know. Um, I don't know if that's really the goal. I don't believe it is. I just think it's misunderstood. Um, and then when it comes to, I mean, a lot of those decisions were rescinded, or a lot of those things were rescinded, but then we still had agency personnel saying, um, well, don't I have to advise you not to spend because I can't enter payment systems to pay. And so it's like, well, we're doing the work that we all through bipartisan legislation agreed that we were going to do. And so I just asked, well, are the contracts going to get canceled? There's termination language in contracts, and so I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's I guess my question back would be are we really talking about the just throwing out contract law here, or I mean, I don't know. I would like to know more about the intent and what the future holds because we're doing really good work, and I'd hate to see
Mm.
it go away.
Cool, thank you. There's another question in the chat box that asks if you could give some examples of how community members can help get prescribed burns off the ground.
Um, yeah, so we started out, doing a lot of work on private property, back in the mid 90s. It was actually a wildlife biologist that was kind of anti-fire at the Forest Service. And they were looking at like these little individual snails, right? And they were like, "Well, I haven't found any of these endemic snails." And and so we said, "Well, let's do a demonstration project." And so we went out there and um, we went and we cut some brush, burned some piles. We were going to do some broadcast burning and compare burning after fuels reduction treatment versus burning without fuels reduction treatment. And the thing that ended up happening was in every single pile where there was still a chunk of charred wood laying there, they found snails. That snail that they couldn't find anywhere was everywhere, and it needed that charred wood,
Mm.
and so that turned that person's viewpoint completely around. And so he became the first person to sponsor a community-based prescribed fire on his property as a fire safe council activity. So he didn't approach that from his job at the agency. He approached that um, from a community member standpoint. And so that really started to change things. And ultimately, it took neighbors seeing the outcomes of the work that happened on their neighbor's property, and then they wanted it too. And then the next neighbors wanted it too, and then the next neighborhood wanted it, and so on. And so that's kind of how that grew in this community.
The next question is by Chaya Werner. They thank you for your talk. They ask, can you discuss a little more some of the reasons fire is not used in the spring?
Yeah, so I don't know, it's kind of it's foundational to our Cutter people's knowledge, practice, and belief systems, and is that we don't use fire for anything but heating and cooking in that time when life is out there reproducing, and so
Mm.
when you really think about it, it's like once you start seeing those indicators, like you're out there and the birds start to change their song, they're doing things different. They're starting to not only build their nest, but actually occupy their nest and start to lay eggs, right? And so then you've got the bumblebees have switched from building energy and finding their nest to actually nesting down there in places that can be impacted. by burning in that time of year, and you can wipe out the whole reproductive cycle of that species. Not to mention the flowers are blooming, all the food that they depend on to
Mm.
have a successful reproductive cycle are out there blooming, and your burning prior to that time helped enhance the holding capacity for the landscape to have more flowers available for them. And so the practices are helping the process, not working against it when you don't burn in that window.
Right. Thank you. Uh, I had a follow-up question to one of the questions that was asked over here, actually, as more attendees are typing their questions into the Q&A box. What are some of the challenges associated with obtaining burn permits, especially for conducting prescribed burns in mountainous terrain in California, in terms of uh, time between planning and coordination and execution?
Well, there are a lot of challenges, and it depends on who's writing the burn permit and where you're burning. And so when it comes to the tribe, um, we have not ever asked for a burn permit because we view that as a diminishment of tribal sovereignty. And so what we've done is we've
Mm,
worked with partners, and partners have taken that on and said, well, okay, well, I am subject to this particular law, and so I will write the burn permit.
mm,
And so or apply for the burn permit, and then we collectively, put together the burn plans and all of those things. The local air district doesn't require a tribally led burn to have a permit for air quality. Once we start getting to the scale to where we end up triggering an exceedance, then that conversation would probably change.
mm,
But for now, the burns that we do are viewed as good and beneficial, and they help to protect against major human health impacts that are likely to occur from having 4 months of like an AQI of going up over 800 for long durations of time. And so and so so with our biggest impediment has been just protecting tribal sovereignty in that space, and just coordinating partners to be able to do that for us. And when you look at like the federal agency burn plans, I mean, people are taught to be very specific about everything. And
mm,
in a lot of cases, when you look at liability law, the more specificity you include, the more they can use against you in
mm,
trying to prove that you were negligent on something, right? And so in all reality, people probably should be using um, less specificity in some of those burn planning documents, like having a burn plan good for a whole year and having a range of conditions in which you may burn based on seasonality and other indicators. I mean, there's just a lot of ways to do it,
mm,
and that is part of the changing the paradigm is how do you frame your outcomes differently? How do you frame your objectives differently? How do you identify different indicators for acting in different situations? Or are you going to have to go through that process every single time you want to burn? If you're going to do that, then more than likely you're going to be past the deadline. You're going to miss your burn.
right. Thank you. And then there's a question by Edward Gonsalves. What can Californians do to promote your wisdom?
Well, I mean, I don't know. California in general, it's like I keep, reflecting back on all of this that's going on or that has recently gone on down in Los Angeles, and and I was down there a few years back, for an exhibit on cultural burning, and it was obvious to me that when the conditions aligned with an ignition down there, that there was going to be some serious problems, and those problems, though complicated, aren't insurmountable. Now, you're not talking about, at least in the places I've seen, I mean, significant like forest management activities to even have to prep for some things, but public acceptance of the fact that less smoke now makes for a survivable future is is something that that society needs to start to grasp. Um, it's that type of activity, even in and around our houses, that's going to protect them. Um, I mean, you can't even buy a house now because insurance is too high. If you can even get it, if you can't get it, you can't get a loan. It's just, I mean, the feedback loop here is making even home ownership unreachable for most, if not, many. And so, I would like to see more folks demonstrating how we can get out in people's yards and make partnerships with cultural fire practitioners and community organizations and
Mm,
prescribed burn associations and whatnot,
mm,
and just get out there as communities and have a barbecue and just do some small scale burning, or that can take the energy out of a out of a spot, well, mass area ignition where you're getting showered with embers. That's what's burning down these towns, is these ember
mm.
showers, and the so yeah, I mean, people just need to be able to engage in that process, and but it's scary because it only takes one thing to go wrong by one person that doesn't really truly know what they're doing, to really set everything back to the beginning and go back to the wholesale fire exclusion, which we've seen the outcome of that.
Okay. Then I would say, as we wrap up today, I have one final question for you, my attendee. What is the best thing that can be done for organizations can do, such as fire safe councils, to go about building connections with indigenous communities and making sure that their voices are being uplifted in this work?
I'm That's a tough one. I've been getting asked that question for a lot of years. It's like in our community, it's like a lot of the organizations, the community-based organizations, were kind of built um, with the tribe in mind, because I mean, it's basically predominantly a tribal community. Um, and we didn't have like a reservation land base or anything like that. And so we've been community centered. All our constitutional jurisdictions are based on our Aboriginal territory as opposed to a reservation land base. And so, a lot of tribes that are, off, like, have been pushed onto small parcels of land and kind of compartmentalized solely within those parcels in a lot of ways. Um, often, have just become used to, not really working with other folks. And so it's, um, it's a tough one. It's just, it's about building relationships with individuals,
Mm,
and then just having the conversations and figuring out, it's the hardest part in that probably is just even figuring out who in that tribal community is the right person to talk to. And, it may or may not be someone in a tribal program, that actually is the person that's going to be knowledgeable about the cultural aspects of burning, right? Because
Mm.
federal and state programs have funded these programs in a way that you have to have these qualifications, and so you have people in the positions that haven't necessarily been brought up that way, and so or have trained not to, to kind of keep some of that stuff in their own, don't talk about it, right? And so it's it's hard. Society has done a very good job of beating this out of indigenous peoples, and it'll be a tough one to recover.
Yeah. Um, Thank you, Bill. My apologies again that we were not able to share the video and along with the audio during the presentation. A special thank you to Bill for the enlightening talk. And as we wrap up today's session, I also want to thank all of you for joining us. Our next session is scheduled for February 25th with Dr. Daniel Swain, who will be addressing how changing hydroclimate whiplash patterns are increasing California's wildfire risk, which we sort of touched upon today. It's another relevant and important topic. We hope to see you there as well. Before we sign off, please keep an eye out for the webinar evaluation that will be sent out soon. And with that, I thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you in all our future sessions. Thank you again, Bill, and have a great day, everyone.